I didn't really know what all to expect, but after looking at it and thinking about it quite a bit, I think that this may do more for future generations than it does for the present generations. I've got great-grandchildren now, and hopefully they'll be interested enough to look at it. I'm sure they will be. But a little walk would be great. Well, I do a lot of sit-ups and various stretching, quite a bit of stretching exercises and stuff. And keeps me from getting, as you get this age, everything starts stiffening up, like your knees don't work right, your balance kind of goes. So the physiotherapist got me doing balance things like going up on my toes and stuff like that. I'm one of those people that like to have private time. Not too much of it, but I can very happily put in a day just puttering around doing the odd thing, but not too many days in a row. I need to be with people quite a bit, but not all the time. I'm quite happy to just curl up with a book or. My name is Edward Walsh. I was born in Farmingdale, Saskatchewan in 1923.
This story is about the Walsh family. It's for their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. It's about Ed Walsh and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. And it's about Ed's wife, Beverly. It's about love, life, war, and family.
The post office in Farmingdale was run by a farmer, and there was not a village or a town of any sort in Farmingdale. So I was born close to that post office in my aunt and uncle's home. Yeah, my father was born in Ireland, Kilkenny, Ireland. My father came to Canada in the early 1890s. And my dad name was John officially, but he was known by all his friends and neighbors as Jack. My father was a man who, a very kind man. He was not the type that opened up about his early life. I think my dad had quite an unhappy start to life. I think it was during the potato famine in Ireland that he and his sister came to Canada. And when they got over here, they were separated by about 50 miles, which in those days was impossible pretty much for young kids to get together. So he pretty much lost track of his sister. He had started school in Ireland, I believe my dad, and when he came over here, when he went to that home, he finished up to grade 8. And then he was on his own and he went throughout the country there, working at various jobs. He learned to be a bricklayer. He didn't have many skills. He was a great axeman. He could really cut trees down. I remember being afraid to touch his axe because it was just like a razor. My father joined the Canadian Army in 1915, went overseas, was wounded twice during the First World War.
Your dad in Vimy Ridge.
My dad never talked about his wounds. He was also gassed. My dad was also gassed with the mustard gas. So his lungs and breathing were affected. Also the wound that he received bothered him somewhat. So my dad's health was not that good, but he worked hard. Came back to the town at High Tor, which was another post office, in which he eventually ran. Like a lot of other veterans from the First World War. The government gave them a quarter section of land and loaned them money, for which they had to repay all of it. All of the people, including my dad, who were in the army and discharged, went up into that country, and the land that the government gave them was mostly swampland, poor farming soil, and I don't know how the world they ever made, he and my mother ever made a go of it. My mother was Isabella Forbes. My mother came up to join her brothers, Jim and Bob Forbes, who had already moved to High Tor and were starting their farms. My mother, that is where my mother met her husband, John, known as Jack by all his friends and neighbors, and they were married in 1919. I remember my mother saying that my father he was very shy. My father was very shy, and he used to come to the door, and off would come his hat. And then he was tongue-tied. My father would be tongue-tied. But I guess my father finally worked up the courage to ask her to marry him, and